look after them. I don't want them struggling to make decisions about my money or my health if I can't. So we made a lasting power of attorney. Now, if I can't speak for myself, they'll speak for me. It's a weight off for all of us, isn't it?
Yes, Mum. Lasting power of attorney. Search your voice, your decision.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 8:05 on LBC. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. On the panel with me are Andrew Rosindell, Conservative Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister and MP for Romford. He's sitting over to my right. Tessa Dunlop, Dr. Tessa Dunlop, historian and broadcaster, the co-host with me of the global podcast Where Politics Meets History. To my left, Samuel Kasumu, social entrepreneur. He was a civil society advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. And next to him, Ben Maguire, making his debut on the show, Liberal Democrat, Shadow Attorney General and MP for North Cornwall. They're here to answer your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, and of course you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app or the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Let's start off with a text question from Benjamin, who says, is just arresting people for saying anti-Semitic things on marches enough to clamp down on this kind of hatred? Should the marches just be banned altogether now? Now, Ben Maguire, I normally always leave the debutante to answer the question last, because it's a kind thing to do, but I think this is probably right up your street, and I think you're the only lawyer on the panel.
Yeah, no, I absolutely don't think that protests of this kind should be banned at all. It's a very proud tradition that we have in this country. We pride ourselves on being a democratic country that has free speech. Absolutely vital pillar of that is to allow freedom of expression and freedom of protest. So banning protests, to me and as a Liberal and a Liberal Democrat, is absolutely anathema, and I hope lots of your listeners would be agreeing with me at home, and I certainly know constituents of mine in North Cornwall who I speak to on this are in complete agreement that this is a pillar of our democracy, that freedom of expression, that freedom of protest against our government. That is what this country is built on. That's what this democracy is built on. But obviously, you would caveat that with hate speech. We absolutely condemn any form of hate speech or incitement to violence. That's completely different to freedom of protest, where we're protesting, in this case, against the ban on Palestine action. So of course there's a balance to be had, but am I in favour of a ban on protests of this kind? Absolutely not.
Isn't there a conflict here between freedom of expression and freedom of speech? Because the Metropolitan Police, Greater Manchester Police, they've announced today that anybody who chants "globalise the Intifada" will be arrested. That's an infringement of freedom of speech, isn't it?
Yeah, and I really do feel sorry for the police in these cases, because they've got a really difficult job to do. And, you know, we've heard about these chants, often not in English, by the way, so it can be quite hard for the police to always understand exactly what is being chanted as well. So I must say I've got a huge amount of sympathy with the police. But they have a job to do. And as I say, that is getting the balance right between freedom of expression and inciting violence or hate speech, which I think is what you're referring to.
But do you think people should be arrested for chanting that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are, as I say, inciting violence against someone else, and we actually have laws in this country to protect you from that. We have the Public Order Act 1986, we've got the Crime and Disorder Act, which actually focus very specifically on protected characteristics like religion, like race. So we already have legislation to protect us from that, and obviously the police's job is to enforce that legislation and police our streets and make sure those protests are safe and that they're not inciting violence against particular groups. So it's a very tricky job. I'm not saying it's easy, and I do have absolute sympathy for the police on this.
OK, Andrew Rosindell.
Well, I believe in freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And of course, throughout our history, people have demonstrated against injustice or things that they don't agree with. And that's part of what makes Britain the free nation that we are. And I defend that. However, there are those who go too far. There are those who overstep the mark. And I worry that the law has not been applied equally to all types of protesters. We're seeing some protesters seemingly get away with vile behaviour and antagonistic behaviour, but others not doing so and being arrested very quickly. So I think the important thing here is to have equality in terms of how the law is applied. And I think there's a lot of questions as to whether that's been happening in terms of the recent demonstrations we've been seeing. I do think that those who are calling for global intifada, well, I think that's worrying. That's inciting potential violence. So there is a case against those who incite potential violence. But we have to apply the law carefully, because we don't want a free society to turn into an authoritarian one, whereby people don't feel that they can express their views freely and demonstrate in the free society we've always cherished.
But isn't it unfair to put this on the police? Because the law is a little bit sort of wet in this regard, isn't it? In that the police have to decide whether one chant is sort of encouraging violence, but another one isn't. I mean, if they're chanting from the river to the sea, you could also say, possibly that's a ratchet down from encouraging a global intifada, but it's still effectively saying that the state of Israel and Jews in the area should either be eliminated or moved.
Well, I think some of these chants are actually suggesting that there shouldn't be Jewish people in Israel. I mean, from the river to the sea sounds to me like they want the Jewish people out. And I don't like that at all. And I think that is inciting hatred towards the Jewish people. And I think the idea of a global intifada as well. I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean that everyone in every town and city across the globe is now going to go out and protest and make life difficult for the Jewish people? I think that's what it sounds like it's trying to do. So, yes, protesting against things you don't like is one thing, but actually harming people's daily lives and people's families and living in a safe community, that cannot be tolerated. So the police do have to make judgments, but it has to be applied evenly and equally across all protests.
Tessa.
Yeah, it's so difficult this evening, by the way. Men, all 3, 4.
We had 3 women on last
great.
night. Just so you know.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be in this heady room and to be considering.
Should we all apologise for being men?
No, don't. You've got a whole hour to make up for it. I think on a practical level, this worries me. And I think of Palestine Action, prohibiting that particular group, which wasn't attacking, but was prescribed, and it was attacking infrastructure of state, Ministry of Defence, RAF planes, etc., but not individuals. And yet that has seen huge numbers of arrests, and then this judicial quagmire, where to put them. We have a prison system that can't cope. We love turning fresh cohorts of individuals into criminals, but we don't actually know quite what to do with the criminals because we haven't got the infrastructure to support it. So that's a very practical concern I have. I agree with you. It's utterly unacceptable for any Jewish person in this country or in other Western democracies to feel unsafe, let alone to feel their life is threatened or to see their life taken, which has happened in such a horrific fashion, both here in Britain and now more recently in Australia. I wonder the extent to which outlawing the words global intifada will actually impact on the safety of Jewish communities. I'm going to be honest. I think they need more support. I know a friend of mine who goes to a synagogue in Hull. They pay for their own security guard, that community. It's not actually the police that are making them secure. And the irony is, just before the attack in Manchester, they had decided, perhaps we don't need him anymore. He's just having a lovely time drinking coffee and costing us. And suddenly, actually, they had to rethink. So I think we need to be practical. I'm also really wary of introducing or reevaluating laws in a sort of knee-jerk fashion just after something horrific has happened. Yes, we all need to watch our step, to be careful about the way we express our concern about what has been an unfolding global tragedy in the Middle East. And by the way, winter will bring fresh horrors. That was the messaging today from the UN and others. But I'm not sure about how this will resolve the problems more broadly.
Okay, Samuel.
Yeah, look, global intifada means global uprising. Clearly, there is some maybe aggressive, reasonable inferences that you could take from the use of the term. But if you take away one term, the same people will probably replace that with another one we always hear about, from the river to the sea. Many Jewish politicians also use the term. And so I have mixed views. In fact, I don't have mixed views. I don't think it would be productive for the term to be banned. And even the head of the campaign against anti-Semitism said it would be a useless measure to ban the term recently. I think all of these things, whether it's the use of terms, protesting, etc., these are symptoms and not causes. And so why the challenges here? We need leadership to be able to bring people together, to build bridges, to foster dialogue. These are things that we don't hear from our political class. We usually hear folks saying you've got to pick a side, and one side is really bad and the other.
Is that true? Because surely, after every terror attack since 9/11. You have politicians going on television doing exactly what you said that they should do. We've got to promote mutual understanding between different religions. We've all got to be kind to each other and all the rest of it. And we're still having that discussion 25 years later.
Yeah, but I think it's less about the discussion, and I don't think that discussion lasts too long. I think after a while, and people, maybe the media, etc., puts politicians under pressure to say you've got to pick a side. Condemn.
Yeah.
It's the media to blame again for everything.
But I think, aside from coming out and saying we've got to build bridges, etc., what are the practical solutions that any politician has actually put forward?
I would like to challenge Andrew to my left here about what you mean.
Right, actually.
Is he? Thank you for that correction. He is certainly to my right.
In so many ways.
Wouldn't be hard, would it?
You several times talked of double standards with the application of the law, and I wondered what you meant by that, and if you could give me a concrete example.
I think that a lot of people in the Jewish community feel that they are not being given the support and the protection they need, whereby the police are walking on eggshells when it comes to the pro-Palestine protests. Look, the pro-Palestine protests, they've taken over the streets of London weekend after weekend after weekend. Not necessarily every weekend, but constantly. And a lot of Jewish people feel that the law is being applied in not the same way as it should be to all. And we see this in all kinds of areas. So the police do have to ensure that they are neutral. They are not walking on eggshells for certain communities, but not others. The law has to be applied equally to all. And I have to say, some of the laws passed by the Labour government, the previous Labour government, haven't helped. I think that many of the acts of Parliament passed by Tony Blair have been weaponised to use for certain groups to claim that they are victims, and for the police to be more cautious about dealing with issues to do with them than perhaps the vast majority of law-abiding citizens who don't go around causing issues and don't protest in the same way.
But under the Conservatives, we had two of our most authoritarian Home Secretaries to date, Priti Patel and Suella Braverman. And so I
think Jackie Smith and John Reid might question that.
Well, I'm standing by the alterations to the Public Order Act, etc. And just to quickly go to that very big, it captured huge headlines. Do you remember it was on Armistice Saturday, and whether that should be in 2023, shortly after the start of the Gaza-Israel conflict, and there's this mass demonstration in support of those in Gaza. And I went to watch it. I didn't go to join in. I just wanted to see, because it's very difficult. You pick up bits on the news, what the news chooses to relay. You pick up bits on social media. So I went and watched it, and I spoke to extensively the police on the ground. And they said, in relation to where their resources were being pulled, they said it was far more challenging dealing with the counter-protesters who were violently charging at the cenotaph on the same day than it was for this gigantic so-called hate march. So actually, if you've got people walking along chanting unsavoury things versus people who look like they may be threatening, whether it's a famous monument or those around them, where do you put your policing resources?
Well, I think the problem is that some people are protesting constantly. I think that
that's the way of making a point, isn't it?
Look, you can't protest constantly to the exclusion of everybody else. Other people have a protest, and that's it. They don't go back the following weekend and have the same process again and again and again.
Maybe that's what I did wrong with my Remain marches. Maybe that's
resources are taken out of boroughs like mine to policing in London. So we don't get police in Romford because they're policing all these protests in London. That's not fair either. So we don't get police on the streets.
Gently push back on what Andrew's saying about the double standards of Palestine Action, because certainly in my constituency and across Cornwall, we've seen mass arrests of Palestine Action protesters. I'm not quite clear on how the law is being applied unequally there. But in terms of repeat protests, that we shouldn't somehow, I think is what you're saying, be going out and protesting again and again. I'll just gently push back on that and maybe suggest some lessons from history. Perhaps the suffragettes, I think they maybe protested more than once and they went out again and again and again.
The Great Reform Act.
Wanted. There's lots of examples like from history. Exactly. So to say that we shouldn't be protesting again and again, I would just gently challenge that, Andrew.
They're protesting to the exclusion of other people. So other people who won't protest because it's being dominated by one particular group of protesters, and the police are concerned about that, and other protests won't go ahead because of it.
Well, I think Tessa's just made the good example that you do see these counter demonstrations all the time, and actually that's a real challenge.
People should protest, but there should be certain limits. You can't have complete anarchy with one particular group constantly dominating Trafalgar Square, Whitehall, Parliament Square, whilst others feel inhibited from doing so.
Much as I would like to continue this discussion for the rest of the programme, we're already 5 minutes over time, so let's get some more questions to you. 0345 6060 973. It's 20 past 8.
This is LBC.
Take the
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
22 minutes past 8. Conservative MP Andrew Rosindell is here. Ben Maguire, Liberal Democrat Shadow Attorney General. Samuel Kasumu, social entrepreneur. And Dr. Tessa Dunlop, historian and broadcaster and podcaster, more to the point. Right, let's go to a text question from Sharon in Folkestone. Did the panel all clap the carers back in the COVID years? In light of what they're doing this week, do they regret doing so? I'm trying to understand that question. What does that mean regarding the doctors' strike, I suppose?
What did the carers do this week?
Yeah, I think that's a very... Let me read that again. Did the panel all clap the carers back in the COVID years? In light of what they're doing this week, do they regret doing so? Oh, I see. So the doctors are on strike. So, yeah, they were the carers. Samuel.
Did I clap for carers? I can't... Probably. So a long time ago, it was very, not blurry, it's a very emotional time for me and everybody. I think these strikes are unacceptable, especially during what is the busiest time for the NHS in the winter. But I think I agree with what Keir Starmer was saying about it being quite irresponsible. But I think actually he is significantly to blame, him and West Streeting, for these strikes, because as soon as they came into power, they gave the unions, the paymasters, they gave doctors, resident doctors, exactly what they wanted, nearly 30% pay rise when nobody in the country was getting anything similar. And of course they're going to come back for more because they've been enabled by them. And so our challenge now is, how do you get to a point where they can be more sensible with their behaviours? The last point I would make is, look, we spend about £200 billion a year on our health service. By 2045, 1 in 4 people in this country will be over 65. It's a black hole, has serious structural challenges. And so what we need is both doctors and our government to be more responsible of how we are using the resources and to be more realistic about what is the art of the possible. One more thing, actually, that really offends me is the fact that we are not training nearly as many doctors as we need to in this country. So we are constantly importing doctors from abroad. We have a system that is broken, is not sustainable, and our government is significantly to blame for that.
But the BMA are saying that we're not giving preferential treatment to British doctors in terms of going for training to become consultants, and that these foreign doctors that have come into the country, they're taking too many of those posts.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, but then that does not necessarily therefore mean that they should get a 30% pay rise. Like, who in this country today can say that they have received similar over the last 2 or 3 years and are demanding the same thing? Countless people, including folks who work for NHS England, are about to be unemployed. They need to read the room.
Tessa Dunlop.
Well, the only person I've heard supporting the junior doctors recently is Zach Polanski of the Green Party, and I don't tack as far left as him. I've got to say, I find their demands unreasonable. I don't know about anyone else, but I would love pay restoration back to 2008. I mean, I work in the media industry. Nobody cares about the creatives. You know, half of the industry is on its knees in Uber driving, if they're lucky at the moment. That we don't live in the same Britain that we lived in. Arguably, we were living outside our means pre-crash in 2008. And I feel that they obviously... they work in human lives. And it does feel like they're slightly holding us hostage because the stakes are so much higher if you're a doctor than if you're pumping out a television programme or something. And what we're seeing, therefore, is the sort of ratcheting up in the value of being a doctor, which is happening anyway because there's a global healthcare shortage. But when I crunched the numbers and I looked at it, I mean, if they don't do any extra time at all and they don't live in London, the minimum that they're going to earn in their first year after university is £38,000 and some, going up quite quickly to £73,000. These are young guys and girls just out of university. Is that so unreasonable, that pay? Is it so expensive in Britain at the moment? Bearing in mind, of course, they will all become consultants, do part private and earn a bloody fortune with a huge pension. I'm struggling to feel for them in the way that Zach Polanski does.
Andrew.
So I think it's a breach of trust. I think that doctors and those that work in the National Health Service, like teachers and others in the public sector, get those jobs because they are trusted to do a job for the British people. They're paid for by the taxpayer. They're not in the private sector. They don't have to make a profit or justify their jobs at the end of the day because they're funded out of the taxpayer's purse. And so for them to withdraw the service they're paid to do, particularly in the health service, the junior doctors, potentially putting people's lives at risk, I think is quite frankly shameful. They should not be striking, but you've got to say, Labour government, once again, they've given them huge pay rise without any productivity deal. No, I'm sorry. There was no productivity. If you give someone a big pay rise, you at least sort out some sort of increase in productivity. They didn't do that. And now they come back for more only a year later. Frankly, it's a disgrace. They should not be striking and they should not be putting people's lives at risk.
Yeah.
Ben.
Absolutely incredible that Andrew, a member of the former Conservative government, that wasted
I was never a member of the government.
£15 billion in COVID contracts were wasted under your watch.
I'm sorry, I was never in the government.
£15 billion under the Conservative government was wasted. And now you're saying that doctors going on strike because they want more pay is a disgrace. I think you need, Andrew, a lesson in what is a disgrace.
So, Ben,
one thing I would say, just let me finish because I didn't cut you off. So if I can just finish my point.
But you're challenging me directly.
You can come back at the end when I'm finished.
I will, don't worry.
So, you know, it's obviously not a good time for doctors to strike. That thing is absolutely clear, and I agree with the other panel members tonight. We've got a flu crisis at the moment in the NHS. We're coming through the busiest period where the NHS is under enormous pressure. It's clearly not the right time for doctors to be striking. And one thing I would say is I think Sharon actually asked at the beginning, did we clap our NHS staff? Yes, I proudly did clap our NHS staff. They got us through COVID. They worked all the hours God sends. They saved lives during COVID, including many of my relatives, by the way. They are heroes of our society. And I think we need to question. I'm not going to go as far as Zach Polanski and say that they should be striking, because I don't agree that. I hope I've made that clear. But one thing I would say is that they work around the clock, far beyond their contracted hours, completely far beyond their contracted hours. And do we want a system in our health service, certainly the direction that Andrew's government was taking us in, where we go to private? Because if we drive these doctors out of the NHS, dentistry is a great example of where we are at the moment. I speak to dentists across Cornwall all the time, and they say, how on earth can I go back into the public sector, Ben? I'm earning 2 times, 3 times, 4 times what I'd earn as an NHS dentist. So there is a fundamental point here. Do we value those workers? Do we value our carers? Do we value our doctors and nurses who are working all the hours God sends?
So would you pay them more?
Well, in this case, I don't think the public finances justify it. And I think at the moment to strike during the flu season is irresponsible. I hope I've made that point clear. But to say that the question was, Tessa, should we have clapped our doctors and nurses? And absolutely we should have done. They are heroes of our society.
I felt, though, at the time I didn't clap. And I felt because it was turning...
Why not?
Because I felt that...
I did.
Well, I didn't, Ian, and sometimes we don't agree, do we? I found that it was sort of turning a certain cohort of reasonably well-remunerated public sector workers into this sacred cow, when there were plenty of other unseen individuals, whether it was people getting food from the farms to the plate, the supply chains, some teachers who were looking after children who had to turn up to school.
I think it was for all the care workers, though, wasn't it?
It wasn't.
All the key
it was
workers.
doctors and nurses. It was the NHS. It was actually, the boys in blue. And I felt that was wrong to put them up in that pedestal. And that arguably is why
I will
they
come
feel
to
they
Samuel
can
in a
leverage.
moment. But Andrew, would you like to respond to that vicious attack from the Liberal Democrats?
It was ill-informed because Ben wasn't an MP at the time, and he didn't have to sit in the House of Commons and deal with the immediate crisis that we were facing. And any government, no matter what party was in power at the time, had to make very swift decisions very quickly. And yes, it costs a lot of money. For the record, actually, I wasn't a member of the government. I was a backbencher. But I voted against all the lockdowns and all the restrictions after the first round of lockdowns, because I didn't believe that it was the sensible thing to do. I didn't believe it was necessary. There's extreme measures, and now we're in huge debt because of it. So I was very critical of the government at the time, and you can check my speeches at that time, Ben, if you like. So I'm independently minded on this, and I do think a lot of money was wasted. There's no doubt about that.
Sounds like we're in agreement then.
Well, I hope so, because, I lived through it, and it was a dreadful thing to have to deal with as an MP, having constituents, stuck on boats and stuck in all kinds of places around the world, not being able to get home, and people worrying about their relatives in care homes. It was a horrific period in our history. But at the end of the day, you have to deal with it if you're in government. And so mistakes were made. Yeah. No one got it right on everything on this.
Sam?
Yeah, listen, I agree with in fact, I disagree with you. I think doctors should have been clapped for, and nurses, and I'm sure I did.
Because you are getting a bit of abuse on our text screen.
Yeah, I didn't want to lie, but now I've had a chance to reflect, and I'm pretty sure I did a few times. I remember some of my neighbours outside of my home.
I just didn't like singling out one cohort of workers. That was my answer.
Where I disagree with you is in this idea that somehow we have to be held hostage by our current doctors, because if you look at the demand of folks who want to study medicine,
that's something I was supposed to say.
I think
what I said.
You said they could
mischaracterised.
Okay, but it sounded like you were saying they could all disappear, so we should all just be mindful of that.
No, I just said make sure we value them.
We value them.
They were holding us hostage because they traded lives.
Tens of thousands of students every year with very good A levels cannot get a place at university to study it. So the demand for doctors, for folks who want to study medicine, is extremely high. They're paid quite well relative to the fact that we have relatively low wages in this country, but we also have a bloated state.
We just said loads of foreign doctors are coming in and taking the places, though.
No, they're taking the jobs, not the that are the vacancies. They're filling the vacancies. They're not taking the spaces in universities.
Because it costs to train people.
Well, no, because we have a broken system.
Yeah.
Right.
But not just
and
the
we can't
cost.
afford to train people.
quickly
Is that what you're saying?
We've mentioned
Very
structural
quickly.
changes, but we haven't mentioned anything about social care. It's so frustrating as a Liberal Democrat. Every week
They're
we
not the ones
stand up in the
striking.
House of
They're not the ones
Commons,
striking, are they?
and it's like fixing a leaky bucket in the NHS. Until we fix social care, we ain't going to sort the NHS
I
out.
agree.
Right, that is another
good.
discussion which we, again, could spend the rest of the programme talking about. But it's 8:34. Let's get the latest news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
2 people have been arrested in central London as police promise tougher action against those chanting a controversial slogan in the wake of anti-Semitic attacks. Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley says the context has changed. Nick Reiner's appeared in court charged with murdering his dad, Hollywood director Rob Reiner, and his mum Michelle. He will be arraigned in January after the couple were found dead at a home in LA on Sunday. And the Duke of Marlborough, formerly known as Jamie Blandford, has been charged with intentional strangulation. The relative of Sir Winston Churchill and Diana, Princess of Wales, is accused of 3 offences between November 2022 and May 2024. LBC weather, rain moving into the southeast tonight, some scattered showers in the northwest, a low of -1.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
8:36. If you've just joined us, Andrew Rosindell, Conservative Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister and MP for Romford, is with us. Ben Maguire, Liberal Democrat Shadow Attorney General, MP for North Cornwall. What's the biggest towns in your constituency?
So we've got Bodmin, Weybridge, Launceston, Bude, and then obviously the pretty visitor spots like Padstow, Rock, Polzeath. So lots of nice surfer spots as well.
Indeed. Do you surf yourself?
I do, actually, when I have time away from this job, which isn't very often at the moment.
What a cushy gig.
Yeah.
Being
I know, I
MP
have to
down
say,
there.
it's one of the nicest constituencies, I think, in the country.
Not there often enough. That's
Samuel Kasumu is social entrepreneur. What does that mean, social entrepreneur?
Help to set up a number of enterprises that have a social mission at its core. You don't need it.
Not just to make money. In other words,
but it's sustainable. So it's not based on grant funding. It's commercial, but with a social mission, job creation, energy.
And Tessa Dunlop, historian and broadcaster, co-host of Where Politics Meets History. We have a new episode out at the moment, don't we?
And we'll have another one tomorrow.
We will. We're prolific, aren't we?
That's one thing we are.
Yeah. Kai says, today left-wing candidate Andrea Egan was elected as the General Secretary of Britain's biggest union, Unison. How significant do the panel think this is for the Labour Party and our politics more broadly? Now, she won with 60% of the vote, and she was thrown out of the Labour Party back in 2022 after the party said she'd shared articles on social media from Socialist Appeal, an organisation banned by Labour. So Christina McAnee, who's a regular guest on this programme, she is out. Tessa, what do you make of that?
Yeah, this is interesting, and it leaves Keir Starmer quite alienated from what traditionally are seen as the sort of, stables and suppliers and funders of the Labour Party. Because Sharon, I think, of Unite is also far left of Starmer. But I don't know how much power she will actually have when it comes to how the funding from the union can be redistributed, if that is indeed what she wants to do, and argue potentially, if they don't like what the Labour Party is doing at the moment, geared away from Number 10 and Starmer's administration. So it's headline worthy. I think it's of note that Keir Starmer's increasingly isolated, and his party, not just within Parliament but also externally in the unions, is tacking to the left, or maybe it's him that's tacked to the right. But I don't know if this will massively have massive implications immediately. What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I have no idea.
Sorry,
really.
are you coming to host?
He was looking at me, but he was looking. It was just a polite way.
What I do know is the left.
Andrew, do speak.
Well, I will. Thank you, Tessa, for giving me the opportunity.
It's my pleasure.
But no, I think the left are very splintered in this country now. Very splintered. You know, you have the Jeremy Corbyn bunch, whoever they're going to be, Greens, Labour Party, very divided. They're not a happy bunch. You can see that at the moment. So inevitably, a lot of trade unions are going to feel disillusioned. Where Unison will go under the new leadership, I have no idea. I don't really study the Labour Party that closely. What I do know is that politics generally in this country is very fragmented, and no one can predict how all this is going to play out in the next two to 3 years. But I do think that the Labour Party, the trust it was given at the last election, has blown it, and I think that they're going to hemorrhage support in all sorts of directions. And I think
hemorrhaging more on the left.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the trade unions will reflect this.
Not necessarily just on the left, because if you look at the Red Wall, increasingly folks there will vote reform. But I do agree with the way that fragmentation is happening across politics. I think with Labour, it's quite interesting because in one respect, there's nothing very right-wing about their economics. They're still big statists. They still spending lots of money. Public spending is still going up. So the places where folks on the left might have issues are probably around things like culture, maybe to an extent. If they feel like maybe Keir Starmer hasn't leaned into certain things that they're interested in. Immigration, of course. The Labour Party are trying to keep up with reform on that. And then perhaps on climate change, because Ed Miliband seems to be...
They've just pulled a whole cohort of low-paid workers into tax never before.
But that is not right-wing. So the point is, like, it's not like trade union members are saying, well, actually, they're spending less money, because they're not.
Trade unions wouldn't want their lowest paid workers to be taxed more. The whole point is redistribution.
Yeah, but they've also increased. I'm not here to defend the Labour Party, but they've also risen the minimum wage for folks who are young.
Yeah, swings and roundabouts. They've been badly hit. The average worker has been really badly hit, particularly lower paid.
I don't know. I think ultimately the issue is most people have a disdain for mainstream political parties right now, because they think actually they're a big fudge and all they do is try and respond to whatever they feel the media wave is going to. So
will Unison's money carry on going to the Labour Party?
I think it will, because what are the alternatives? It's not going to go to the Green Party, is it?
Isn't it? Could do.
It's not going to go to the Lib Dems, no offence. It's going to stay with Labour because they don't have a choice. They're basically trying to send a signal, which is we want you to be more left-wing, but I'm thinking economically, there's not much more Keir Starmer can do.
Okay, Ben?
I just find these endless infighting and political squabbles so boring, I have to be honest. We saw it under the last Conservative government. Obviously, when your Prime Minister Boris Johnson was in Downing Street, it was the right of the party versus the centrist of the party and the Cameronites. I just completely switched off from it. And I'm someone that's actually interested in politics.
Liberal Democrats at all, does
Absolutely
it?
not. No, we don't have any
splits between the Orange Bookers and the Beard and Sandals Brigade.
Well,
you're
going back sort of 20 years now into Charles Kennedy's
Kicking
era.
out Christine Jardine, poor woman.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that, but
I am.
Well, that was quite an obvious case where our spokesperson voted against our party line and she had to resign her position. I think that happens in all parties. I wouldn't call that factional infighting. I think that's a slight stretch. If I voted against my party, then I'd expect to resign my front bench role as well.
As a Lib Dem?
Yeah, of course. That's called party discipline. Oh. One thing I would say, though, is we've seen this again and again in Labour. We had Lucy Powell elected recently as deputy leader. other. We've had stories in the media about Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner forming some sort of alliance on the left and ousting the Prime Minister.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I must say, I think people at home, when they're facing a Christmas where they're not sure if they can turn the heating on, they're not sure if they can afford their Christmas dinner, they're not sure if they can afford gifts for their children, I think it's actually quite distasteful to hear the kind of infighting and bickering.
This isn't infighting. This is just an election of someone.
Less than 18 months after the government were elected on a mandate for hope and a mandate for change. We're seeing Starmer's candidate in this case being beaten by a more left-wing candidate. Who cares, frankly? What about solving some of the problems that this country faces and that the people in our constituencies really face?
As if the Liberal Democrats have got the answers to anything. All the Liberal Democrats go on about is going back into the European Union.
Oh, I wondered how long you'd take to get onto that, Andrew.
Frankly, is...
I was waiting for you to get onto it.
Frankly, is a denial of our democracy.
Because your Brexit has been such an enormous success for this country, hasn't it? It's almost laughable.
Hang on. The question was on the new General Secretary of Unison, and we're now diverting onto Brexit.
Broadly, what's interesting about these two clobbering each other, that's Andrew for the Conservatives and Ben for Team Liberal, is that it speaks to the malaise that hangs around Britain at the moment.
Don't be so poky.
No, I'm so sorry, but it's true. It's one of the reasons why we can't actually afford to pay our junior doctors more competitively. It's one of the reasons why they probably will. Some of them emigrate to Australia and America, where the economies are looking a bit more perky. Actually, since 2008, we have dismally failed economically. You can blame Brexit, you can blame COVID, you can blame the Conservatives, you can blame Keir Starmer. Something's wrong.
Yes.
And people sense that, which is why they feel homeless. It's why Samuel and I are drifting along, doing podcasts and talking about social directives, because we're lost and we're looking for good leadership.
And this is why people are unfortunately flocking to reform. I say unfortunately, but reform or the Greens. Where they're not flocking to.
That must be the reason that Bonnie Blue has joined Reform.
Well, I didn't expect you to take it down that route.
We might have a question on that later, or not. 8:45.
LBC
40.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:47. Andrew Rosindell, Ben Maguire. They're having a bit of a stooshy with each other, I have to say.
Thought we were getting on quite well.
Samuel Kasumu and Tessa Dunlop here. Text question from James. Brief answers on this one. Kemi Badenoch told you she wants the BBC to win against Trump. Do you all? Ben.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Ian?
Kemi Badenoch told you, she wants the BBC to win against Trump. Do you?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a pattern of President Trump trying to silence his critics, whether it's choosing which reporters are allowed into his White House to ask him questions. Again, talk about a pillar of democracy, being open to scrutiny, being transparent, being open to challenge, being asked questions that you maybe don't feel completely comfortable about being asked. It's an absolute crucial pillar of our democracy. Clearly, President Trump doesn't like the BBC. I've seen him interviewed by the BBC many times, and he never seems to like the questions that they're asking him. Look, the BBC made a mistake here. That's quite clear. They've apologised. To sue them for, is it $5 billion, $10 billion we're hearing now? Clearly, that's an intimidation tactic. And I really don't see how that's going to end. But it's interesting because I was on a panel show last week with one of Trump's advisors, and he was playing from exactly the same playbook as President Trump. He was challenging Vicky Young, the BBC presenter, on every single question that was being asked of him. Wasn't willing to stand up to that scrutiny. Wasn't willing to answer any of her questions. Some of them are really quite straightforward. And I think we're seeing a pattern, a really disturbing pattern from our once closest ally, of this kind of denigration of democracy and a sort of real desire from the White House not to have any scrutiny, not to have any questioning, and just to shut down any critics.
You said once closest ally. They still are our closest ally. No, that has not changed.
They're not.
Of course they are. Firstly. Secondly,
that's our closest
ally. The
ally.
Chancellor doesn't think so. He said on Friday, Pax Americana is at an end.
Our closest ally wouldn't be suing our national broadcaster for $10 billion.
It's a very strange American thing to sue people every time you just are a bit upset. It's culturally what they do over there.
It's not very presidential, is it?
Not at all. Not at all. But I believe that. Well, I hope that the BBC wins, and I want them to win. But I don't want the BBC not just to win with Donald Trump. I want the BBC to win in general, because I think it's an institution that is under severe attack.
Unless it's in a fight with LBC.
Because it's an institution that's under severe attack, and it's also very important. It does a lot, not just in the UK, but across the world. I think we should fight for its independence, fight for it to be on a sustainable footing, and hopefully this moment passes. I hope it doesn't even end up going into court, to be honest.
Andrew?
Well, the BBC needs to be impartial, and it needs to present the news as it is. And I think people around the world respect the BBC. And when they do things like splicing clips of President Trump to make it look like he said something which he hasn't, that clearly is wrong and should be condemned. Now, of course, I don't want the BBC to pay £10 billion to Donald Trump, because my constituents would finish up getting the bill for that. And the licence fee is already really in question, whether it's something that should continue in today's era. Without another £10 billion having to be paid, it'd probably bankrupt the BBC. It probably wouldn't exist. It'd probably collapse if it had to pay that sort of money. So of course I don't want that. And Kevin's absolutely right to say that we want the BBC not to lose this case, but equally so I want the BBC to be professional and not left-wing biased organisation,
well,
which a lot of my constituents think it is now. They watch GB News now, I have to say.
I'm sure they never make any mistakes, Andrew.
BBC.
I'm sure they've never made a mistake at GB News.
Tessa.
Yeah. That's interesting. This is Andrew on my right, who began this show worrying about double standards in policing. I'm still a bit befuddled as to what those double standards are. And now you're talking about a lack of impartiality within the BBC, given the extent, the size of its output. This was an error, undoubtedly, splicing Trump together. Heaven forfend, they made a mistake. But I don't think in the same breath you can compare the BBC
Tessa,
with GB
the BBC
News.
is taxpayer funded.
Yes, I
GB
know.
News is not. You cannot compare the two.
I know, but what GB News does
Don't bite the hand that feeds you, Tessa.
They're not feeding me properly. What GB News does is it serves your right-leaning clientele in Essex.
That's a free speech channel.
Yes, with the messaging they want to hear.
They even let you go on it.
They do.
So it proves that it's free speech.
They do occasionally let me go on it so that I can be trolled and get them clicks. But the point is the BBC is, on the whole, impartial. And guess what? A lot of what they have to say, without it going through a dog whistle filter, is quite difficult to hear at the moment.
Shall we just let me read this out from Simon Marks, our US correspondent, who has been at the White House, and he's taken photographs of some of the presidents who Donald Trump has put up on the wall just outside the Oval Office. Joe Biden's plaque, underneath it says, "Sleepy Joe Biden was by far the worst president in American history." He sent me pictures of this. This is not fake news. Obama's plaque refers to Barack Hussein Obama and calls him one of the most divisive political figures in American history. Bill Clinton's plaque at the end of the write-up reads, "In 2016, President Clinton's wife, Hillary Clinton, lost the presidency to President Donald J. Trump."
Oh, my God.
I mean, you can't make it up, really, can you? But on the subject of Donald Trump, we have a question from Carlo in Highbury. What's the point in trying to do deals with Trump when he just goes back on them all the time? Is there any point in trying to do business with him? Now, I think what he's referring to there is this £31 billion tech prosperity deal with the US, which has been suspended this week, while The Guardian has also reported that the separate agreement to avoid tariffs on the sales of medicines lacks any legal basis beyond the headlines which the two countries put out in their respective press releases at the start of this month. Andrew Rosindell.
So we have a very weak government, a very weak Prime Minister, desperate to look like they're getting these trade deals all over the world without examining the detail, and that is exactly what has happened. So Sir Keir Starmer comes to the House of Commons and talks about all these great trade deals that he's getting and how we failed to do it in government. Well, the truth is a trade deal cannot be done overnight, and you have to examine the details before you sign an MRU, which gives an impression we've got a great trade deal when in fact the fine details have not been gone through. So I blame entirely the current government on this. Of course, America will look after America's interests. I only wish we had a government that was looking after Britain's interests.
Oh, come on, Andrew. That was so slogan. I mean, you're not on the campaign trail at the moment. It's understandable that Keir Starmer, who bought Trump over because he's trying to hold Europe together, was going to do some performative, look what we've got, we're going to have a nice little deal with tech and we're going to work it out with medicines. The print wasn't dry. Obviously, it needed interrogated. And we know that when it comes to doing a trade deal with America, all the power sits on the other side of the Atlantic, which is why I campaigned. Clearly, in your playbook, I didn't get out in the streets enough. I campaigned extensively for Remain. I park a lot of the problem, and it is historic, in your lap. Can we move on?
That's just totally unfair.
It's not totally unfair. It's not totally unfair.
I think that there is an important point here, which is that, as I said earlier, America continues to be our closest ally. However, we know that the way the world...
than our European
Hang on.
We know that the world is evolving drastically. Like, if you look at the Africa subcontinent, where I spend a lot of time now, an extra billion people will be added to this earth from that continent. If you look at places like India, the economy is set to dominate the world. It is currently dominating the world in many respects. If you look at places like Poland, where lots of folks who are living here are going back to Poland, taking their spouses with them because their economies are growing. What we lack, which is more important than whether Donald Trump agrees to a trade deal or whatever, is a clear plan of action about how Britain will continue to thrive in a changing world. And so, because we're so weak in that regard, somebody like Donald Trump can easily agree to a deal and then decide they don't want to do it anymore. And what are we going to do about it?
Ben.
Donald Trump was absolutely delighted when this country exited the European Union, because he knew that he could get us completely on our own, completely isolated from our nearest trading partners across Europe. He didn't want to deal with the whole block of the EU. He still doesn't. He wants to see Brexit replicated in Italy, in France, in Hungary, in all of the European countries, because he knows from a business perspective he can pick them off one by one, he can bully them, he can push them around, and that's exactly what he's doing to Keir Starmer at the moment. 1 minute we've got 10% tariffs on our trading goods. The next that's up for grabs. The next the tech deal's been suspended. He's basically a megalomaniac and a baby that's happy to throw his toys out of the pram at the slightest inconvenience, and we're completely at his mercy because we're all on our own and we don't have any allies outside anymore.
The EU is not an exciting bloc. Let's just be honest. Like, what does Portugal or Spain have going for
it? But it's got an enormous economy of 27 huge
We cannot
countries.
have three people speaking at the same time.
We're excited.
Okay, let's go to our fun question, shall we? Which I don't think I've given you any notice of at all. It is here. This is a very simple one. What are your panel's Christmas traditions? Tessa.
Falling out with my little brother. And
inviting me round to lunch? Not on Christmas Day.
That's not Christmas Day. You haven't made that in a circle. A tangerine at the toe, monkey nut shortly afterwards, and a cracker at the head. And I'm talking about the stocking.
Yes, stockings are very important.
Yeah, and they're on the end of the bed. They're not on the mantelpiece. I don't like
quite
them
right too.
Near the mantelpiece. And we are all allowed to open one present on Christmas Eve. But now I'm an adult, I seem to get hardly any presents. So, like, if I open my present on Christmas Eve, it makes
Welcome
Christmas
to the
Day
world
a bit
of man.
Yeah, it's really. Yeah, but men don't give presents. So I find that
my dad used to. He used to buy presents and then write the tag to Gary from Gary.
Did he for himself?
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's where I get my selfish bit from.
Funnily enough, I generally don't buy presents for men because they don't give back, and I'm quite transactional. And I had a very close cross-dressing friend who was a man, and he was so hurt when one Christmas he didn't get a present. And I realised, of course, I should have bought him a present because he does mascara and all that stuff. So it's a minefield, the modern world. I basically now try and give presents just to those under 20. So when you come round on Sunday, don't expect a bump under the tree.
A bump?
Or lump, box.
Okay. Andrew?
So, as an MP, I've established my own tradition in Romford. We have carols around the Christmas tree where I invite all the local scouts, the churches, the schools, the community groups to come to Margaret Thatcher House in Romford.
Excellent.
And we sing carols around the Christmas tree.
Very good.
And we have mulled wine and mince pies. It's not political. It's for the whole community to come together to celebrate Christmas and to uphold our Christian heritage, which I think in the country we're living in today, it's very important that we hold true to those Christian traditions.
Ben?
One tradition that we have in Cornwall, actually, which I'm looking forward to hopefully taking part in this year if it isn't cancelled due to all the sewage dumping, is the Santa swims. So I'm due to be in Poles F on Christmas Day this year, braving the cold water with hundreds of other people. Looking forward to that. It's always a nice, refreshing start to the day after a few drinks on Christmas Eve.
I did this when I was a candidate in North Norfolk in 2000. This must have been 2004. They have a charity thing in the North Sea off Cromer Pier. So I obviously thought, well, I'm a candidate, I've got to do this. So I did it. But unfortunately, I wore white toweling shorts, which were quite clingy, if you get what I mean.
I'll bear that in mind.
I do have the pictures, which I might share on my Instagram, or I might not. Samuel.
Wow. Okay. I'm always the worst at the fun question. Unfortunately, I'm probably still going to be the worst. We play Monopoly with my family, and we're fiercely competitive. I'm always accused of cheating, which is always a lie, kind of.
Do you end up with Old Kent Road or Mayfair?
Park Lane, yeah, Mayfair, where possible. There was one time when I flipped the whole board and I walked away and I'm going home, and I nearly left my wife. She wasn't very happy about that.
Oh, no.
But yeah, we won't be playing Monopoly this year. And by the way, Andrew's answer was solid. I liked your answer.
What, singing around a Christmas tree and upholding?
Everything about it.
Holding hands, yeah.
Will Tom Robinson be joining me?
I wish I lived. Oh, come on! I wish I lived in Romford.
I'm not going to reply to that. So in Romford, we have many churches and many organisations, and we come together to celebrate Christmas in unity. And I think that our constitution, our laws, our monarchy is based on the Christian foundations. And I think as a parliamentarian, I see it's part of my duty to defend those traditions. And I think that we should depoliticise Christmas and make it an occasion for everyone to enjoy. And that's why I have an event to which I invite literally everybody, regardless of politics, even Liberal Democrats.
Oh, wow.
The Christmas spirit is here, isn't it?
I feel at this point I need to do a Meghan Markle and say happy holidays.
That's a nice note to end on.
Claire sent this text. I don't usually listen to your show and actively switched off when Kemi Badenoch was on. Well, you missed a very good hour there. But I'd like to applaud the healthy honesty from some of your guests regarding Brexit and the realpolitik of our position. You could have sounded like every other discussion, but your guest's forthrightness opened up a good debate. We'll take that compliment, won't we?
I think she was complimenting the guests.
I think she was complimenting us all. You always have to introduce a sour note to it, don't you?
I'm bitter to your sweet.
That was good.
Merry Christmas, because that's it for Cross Question for 2025. It'll be back for 2026 from Monday, the 5th of January. And we have a bit of an exciting development to tell you about Cross Question. But we'll leave that until the 5th of January. But let's, in the next hour, talk, and thank you very much indeed for coming on the show, all of you, today. Let's talk about marches. The Met and Greater Manchester Police earlier said that they'll take tougher action against people who use placards and chants to target the Jewish community. But the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism says it's a useless token measure and wants the marches banned. Well, I was joined by earlier in the programme by Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, and she told me she agrees.
Where the marches become very clear intimidation rather than just protest, I think yes, a lot of people are exploiting free speech. Free speech was to talk about your personal grievances, not to create a climate of fear.
So what do you think after what happened at Bondi Beach at the weekend?